So it takes a little moment to set it up, but it's worth doing. So today, well, not actually today, but it's Tuesday, the 25th, the church in its calendar remembers Mark the evangelist. Now, most people would agree that this Mark is John Mark, not just the author of the gospel, but the same John Mark that we encounter through the book of Acts as the companion of Paul and Barnabas. And so because of both his work with Paul, the fact he writes his gospel, and within the gospel of Mark, he places a great emphasis upon the cross and the teaching of Jesus. So he has become known as Mark the evangelist. And as we look at these opening verses of his letter, so we see that Mark builds upon the words of both Isaiah and Malachi, the two, not only the two, but two of the Old Testament prophets. And we see how he introduces us to John the Baptist, who introduces us to Messiah, who is then confirmed by God at his baptism, and then who goes on to proclaim the good news, as Mark puts it. And what we see in the opening sentences of this book, or gospel, as we call it, is we see Mark setting the foundation for what he is going to go on and write and record. And in setting the foundation, so we see that he lays two important markers or questions. And these are, who is Jesus Christ? And what is this good news or gospel? Those are the two markers, the two questions that he establishes early on, and that through the rest of his gospel then he goes on to answer. But I wonder, as we today think about those two questions, who is Jesus and what is this good news or gospel? I wonder how you might answer them. Imagine as you leave church this morning, someone stops you and says, you've just been to church. Tell me, who is Jesus and what's this thing called the gospel? What would you say? Would you say anything? Well, as we look at these opening verses from Mark, so hopefully we'll see how what he says then can help us today as we think about those two questions. And so the first question, who is Jesus? Now, one of the key things that we see is that Mark doesn't start with any popular or personal opinion. He starts way back. He starts, as I said a moment ago, he starts with the prophets. And so he reminds us that Jesus Christ and his coming to us is part of something bigger than just ourselves or what we might think. Jesus Christ is part of God's eternal plan for creation. And Mark then, having established that, goes on to reveal that this Jesus is God's message, God's living word to us, to you and to me. Jesus is part of God's revealing himself to his creation in a way that we might recognize. And so what Mark is saying to us here, and what he develops more fully through the gospel, is simply put, Christ is God with skin on. He is, as we say at Christmas, Emmanuel, God with us, God amongst us, reaching out to us. And that's echoed in the words that he records spoken by God when Christ is baptized. This is my Son whom I love. Christ is the one who knows us, who identifies with us. We see that through his temptation. But he's also the one who calls us to a better way of living. and then sends us to reveal that way to others. And so for Mark, the answer, who is Jesus Christ? Well, Christ is that constant reminder that God has come to us and continues to come to us, reminding us that we're no mere accident. We're not here by mistake. We're created. We have purpose. We're loved and we're valued. And we are called to love and value others. Who is Jesus? I wonder what you might say. And then this second sort of marker or question, what is this good news, this gospel that we have to share? And again, we see Mark starts with the prophets. This good news, again, is not something new. It's not something that the early church dreamt up. It's something that was rooted in history. The prophets looked forward to it. And so again, it's part of God's plan and purpose. And so Mark sees the communicating of this good news as being set, or important to set it within a context. He sets it in the context of the opening of the Old Testament. He goes back to the book of Exodus, where God promises the people of Israel that an angel will lead them out of Egypt and into the promised land, out of their slavery and into freedom. And the Exodus says this, see, I'm sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I've prepared for you. And the people then were encouraged to listen to and not rebel against this divine messenger. And that's the theme that Isaiah the prophet picks upon, which Mark then refers to, and then he applies it to the present, to the disciple or to the early church then. And I guess it still applies to us today. That this gospel, this good news, is something that makes it possible for us to enter a new exodus, as it were, to leave our old self and to enter or journey toward the promise of new life, of relationships restored, forgiveness, acceptance, and love. This is good news, new life, and all that comes with it, offered through faith in this Jesus who comes to us. We can know forgiveness, hope, belonging. We can know what it is to be loved and valued. And in seeing what the prophets saw, so Mark echoes their call that we, like the people then, we too are called to be ready, to be prepared, and to prepare for the coming of Messiah. We need to turn from our current ways and be willing to choose to accept God's new way. And so Mark, in essence, tells us that this good news is an opportunity that is offered to each one of us, an opportunity to choose a better way of living. Now, it might not necessarily be an easier way of living, but it's the opportunity to choose a way that acknowledges who we are, that we have purpose, that we are loved, that there is forgiveness, that there's something better than this life, both now and beyond this life. Who is Jesus? And what is this good news or gospel? I wonder what you would say. But I guess as I draw to a close, it brings us back to face a personal challenge, if you like. And that is, how will we continue to choose to respond? Christ comes to us and offers to us this good news. invites us to move toward a better way of living. But how will we choose to respond? Will we open our hearts and our minds and wrestle with what it means to accept this, and then to live out day by day what we discover through our lives? Or will we simply close our heart and our mind and move on, unchanged, unmoved? And when we're stopped by the person outside the church who says, "So tell me," we'll go, "I don't know." How will we choose to respond to this good news that Mark shares with us, that we're called to share with others? Amen.